Welcome to Eviliv, the live media commentary show that answers the question, how often do people get possessed by playing the Ouija board? Subscribe if you're new to the channel because today we are reviewing The Exorcist, a novel. That's right, not the film. The film's great. The film's the best. But this is the novel. And yeah, my initial thoughts are, why have I not read this before? I can't believe it's taken me this long to read this amazing book. Okay, so let's get into it. This is published by Harper Anniversary Edition, October 4, 2011, which is the one I read. And let's see if we can get these covers up. Now, I have a whole bunch of the different covers going to be rotating. The version I read, it was on Kindle, and it was the red cover. So you'll see it pop up here as we're speaking. Now, this was originally published by Bantam Books, July 1st, 1972. So it's been in circulation for a very long time. One of the other reasons why I'm so shocked it's taken me so long to read this. As a young man, I read Amityville Horror, and it completely changed the way I thought about horror films and horror novels. Up until that point, I'd never really read horror novels. It was always fantasy. And so reading this reading this just recently, I mean, I literally finished it yesterday. I started on, I don't know, like Tuesday or Monday or something. It was a really quick read. It's like under 400 pages. I was just following along the book in my head. The film in my head the whole time, because it's almost beat for beat. I mean, the novel does have things that the film doesn't, for obvious reasons, just time. You can't really accommodate all that. But there's also the overarching themes that I'm going to get into in a second that really are hit and hammered in the novel that aren't really explored as in depth in the actual film itself. So because by now everyone has seen The Exorcist, I mean, it's, as far as horror films go, it's top 3 of all time best horror films, and it's up there with Rosemary's Baby and Psycho. So you can't, hey Chris, you can't get better than The Exorcist as far as horror films go. And so I had really, really high expectations on this novel because, I mean, to be honest, my favorite horror film of all time jumps with Rosemary's Baby being number 1 or Psycho being number 1. I love those two horror films desperately. I'm not even entirely sure you'd call either of them horror, though they do fit in the genre overall. It's Captain Howdy. That's why you said Howdy. It's the demon in this novel and in the film. Captain Howdy. But like, it's, once I read Rosemary's Baby, which was directed and produced by Roman Polanski, it literally almost word for word for the book throughout the entire book. There's like 2 scenes that were taken out of the book that were not in the film. But other than that, it was literally just frame for frame, scene for scene, paragraph for paragraph right out of the book. And this, I was expecting to be dramatically different, but it was actually really, really close and on par and the same. So it's very interesting that back in the 70s and 60s, they did their best to try to match the books to the films. And nowadays, they sort of just throw it in the air and say, we're just going to do whatever we want. Okay, that being said, this book is divided into 4 distinct sections. Part 1 is the beginning, Part 2 is the edge, Part 3 is the abyss, and Part 4 is, and let my cry come unto thee. So when you think about The Exorcist as a film, and then, you know, if you've read the book or you plan on reading the book, and thinking of it in those terms, you think, well, this is about a little girl named Regan who gets possessed by a demon, and Father Karras, Damien Karras, has to exorcise the demon out of her. But that's really not what the book is about. Yes, it is couched in that throughout the center of it, and we live the pure horror of Regan being possessed, but the book is actually about Father Lancaster Marin battling the Pazuzu demon. That's literally, it's couched on either side at the very beginning and very end of this novel about that moment, that battle between those two. And I found that very interesting because in the film, you do get a taste, a hint of that idea. But in the novel, it's really hammered home. So we open, of course, in Iraq, and Father Lancaster Marin is overseeing an archaeological dig, and he uncovers this sort of little statue, a little, a carved head, which it emanates evil, right? And so he sort of goes and looks for this tall statue that they had uncovered, arguably, I don't know, tens of thousands of years ago. I don't know when they uncovered it, but they saw this massive, the book came first and then the movie, this massive statue of Pazuzu, right? And so he's looking at this little artifact and he's looking at Pazuzu. And it doesn't really say anything overtly at the very beginning of the book, but later on when they're talking about who should oversee this exorcism or who should conduct Regan's exorcism, they say, well, of course, Father Marin, because no one else has ever done exorcisms before. It's an idea that was sort of dropped way back in like the Middle Ages. The Catholic Church just doesn't do it anymore. And that is what I loved about this. You know, it was released in 72 originally, 1972. And even back then when he was doing the research, the author, he didn't see like a lot of proof of modern exorcisms, because as soon as psychology came into this sort of cultural scene, psychology answered nearly every single one of the questions that exorcisms were trying to answer. And that is that demons were not possessing humans. Humans just have messed up sensibilities. You know, we have mental diseases. We have differing chemistries that projects outward in dramatically crazy ways from what we perceive as the norm. Nowadays, you know, we prescribe Ritalin to kids who are just hyperactive. Back in, you know, the Middle Ages, they would say, oh, that kid is possessed. He's acting out and he's not listening. So, though, yes, science has been able to solve a lot of the problems, it took a very long time, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of horror for people having to go through that trial and error. It doesn't answer all of the problems. And I am not a proponent of demons like anthropomorphic entities. I don't believe them. I don't believe they exist. I love the idea of them. But I really like how this novel came to the concept of exorcisms from a position not of belief, but of abject disbelief. So, and then that's really interesting because the whole time it's trying to find a doctoral medical reason for Regan's behavior. And then it goes to psychological reasons, psychiatry. And then finally, after all of that is exhausted, they then go to religion. And in the book, of course, she's possessed, and so that ends up being the direction that ends up working. But I really, really appreciated it as a modern reader, as someone with modern sensibilities, at least I like to think I do, that they didn't just jump in feet first saying, yes, exorcisms are real, and let's do one, you know? I mean, it was fought the entire way. So part one, the beginning, was really about introducing us as an audience to, as the reader, to Father Marin, this man who he's the only modern in the Jesuit DC area who has conducted exorcisms before, and it almost killed him last time. It took months. It was in deep Africa. He was this young boy was possessed. He worked months trying to get the demon out of him, and he was successful. And again, that was Pazuzu. And so when he was in Iraq and he saw the statue and he had the little trinket that he uncovered, he knew Pazuzu's back. Pazuzu's coming for me again. He didn't like losing last time. He's going to come and do it again. So Father Marin is mentally prepared. And then we're introduced to arguably the best characters of this entire novel. And that is Regan, Chris's daughter, the actress Chris, and Chris MacNeil. Now, Chris MacNeil is a 35-year-old actress, or 35-ish. I can't remember exactly the age they said. She just reflected in it once. Live in New York for a month and you'll believe the demons are real. Yeah, I got friends up in New York. So the the strength of this story, the power of this story, is not the possession of Regan and the exorcism of Regan. It's the relationship between Chris, the mother, and Regan, the daughter. They spend so much time in this novel and the film presenting the dynamic between these two people. Now, Chris is recently divorced from her husband, Howard, who is off gallivanting with his young lover, in some other country on a yacht somewhere. So much so that he can't even call his daughter on her birthday. And Chris is full of anxiety as a parent and as a single mother, but also she's an actress. And so we have to deal with the stress of her profession. And she wants to break into directing, and she finally gets the opportunity when all the shit hits the fan. And so she can't actually take it, and it's going to, make her career suffer in the long run. But she obviously, as any rational human would, chooses her daughter over her personal career. And so, she sort of forsakes everything just so she can be with Regan and try to help Regan as best as she can, because she doesn't want to institutionalize her. She doesn't want to give up on her. Seeing their dynamic before Regan gets ill is the key to everything in this novel. It is pure love between them two. When Chris comes home after having studied her script and her lines and preparing for her next day of work all night, she wakes up groggy, goes downstairs. She has Willie and Carl Ingstrom, which are the sort of, she's living in a house in D.C., but she's renting it. And so she has caretakers that sort of look after the house. And that's Willie and Carl. They do stuff like clean the house and, do chores around the house and fix food and stuff like that. So they've fixed breakfast for her. She comes down to eat, and Regan every morning has a rose. The little girl wakes up in the middle of the night, gets a rose for her mom because she loves her, and puts it on her plate so that the first thing she sees is a rose from her daughter. Shit brings me to tears. It is so touching and heartfelt. And just knowing that there's an overt appreciation. First of all, the act itself is beautiful. But then there's a reciprocal appreciation for the act whenever they're together. There's a lot of physical, intimate contact, hugs, kisses, holding hands, arms around each other. Like there's that physical connection that every baby book in the world always tells you. Make sure you have physical connections with your children so that they understand that intimacy is something that's important and they're not afraid of it later in life. So that, that's one of those things where you're playing with the kids as their babies, you're putting their hands and feet in their mouth and you're blowing on their belly, doing little zerberts and making them giggle and stuff. And you're always, touching them and holding them and stuff. That's an important part of being a parent, is not, of course, being present, but also being tactile and being like physically connected to them as much as emotionally you hope to be connected to them later. And as we see Chris and Regan, they are completely emotionally connected to each other as a beautiful relationship that I desperately wish I had with my daughter right now as a teenager, and I don't have that relationship anymore. So, seeing them together just melts my heart. And it's important to see that because it explains why Chris fights so hard for her daughter later on. Why she's willing to go literally to hell for her daughter, because they have that love and connection. If she was a distant stepdaughter, as sort of anecdotally you see in fairy tales and stuff, she wouldn't give a fuck, and she would institutionalize her or send her in jail or something for what she suspects she does later on. But because she has that deep connection, then we see her go through everything that she goes through. And holy shit, does she go through stuff. So the edge in part 2 is where we see their relationship, of course, carried over from the beginning. But then we also see the telltale signs of the early possession. And this is all instigated around the MacGuffin of the situation, not the MacGuffin as in they're searching for it, but the MacGuffin as in the pivotal object that forces the possession, and that's the Ouija board. I myself have played with Ouija boards as a young man and as a child and as an adult. It's part of it's ingrained in my DNA. I've always loved the occult. I've always loved the idea of ancient wisdom and stuff. Again, it's all bullshit, but I still love the idea of it. So, I mean, one of the things I did when I was a young man, I made my own Ouija board. I like burned it into wood, and I sanded it down, and I polished it, and I did a whole thing. And I would always have my friends come over, and I took it with me to the military, and I had military friends. They would come over, and we would do the Ouija board, and they were convinced that everything was real. And in my head, I kind of know better. But I enjoyed it. I loved vicariously living the reality of that side of the occult through someone else's eyes. And so, and I say all this as a preface because you can't be possessed by a Ouija board. I just want everyone to understand that. They're literally toys made by Parker Brothers and released as a toy. So it's not something that is connected to some other reality. It is not something that's going to open you up. And so, like any great horror novel or horror film, there has to be a fair amount of suspension of disbelief. If you can get there, then you're in. If you can't get over that hurdle, then you're probably not going to enjoy this novel very much, because it all hinges on the idea that Regan is playing the Ouija board by herself. Therefore, the demon called Captain Howdy comes into her. Now, of course, Captain Howdy is actually Pazuzu, who is waiting for Father Merrin. Of course, we don't fully understand that until later in the book and later in the film, but that's really what's happening. So, Regan has been using it, and Chris, the mother, comes down and says, "Hey, can I play that with you? I know how to play it." And so they try, but it doesn't actually work. She's like, "That's not very nice, Captain Howdy. Don't you think my mom's pretty?" And nothing happens under the planchet. The planchet is the little seeing eye that you move around the Ouija board, if you didn't know. So it was really, really amazing seeing them. She was making this little figure, this little statue of like a bird for, I think, Thanksgiving that's coming up or something like that, because this is shot in the fall originally. And it was like this present for the mother that she didn't want to show the mom until it's fully finished. And so, Regan always plays in the basement all alone. She has a tutor that comes in, Sharon Spencer, who also helps, sort of an assistant to Chris, the mother and actress. But ultimately, this is sort of Regan's space to draw and paint and read and play Ouija. So she becomes infected with this. She ends up taking it up to her room, and that's when it really starts taking over, where she stops just hearing Captain Howdy through spelling out letters as you do on a Ouija board. She starts to audibly hear Captain Howdy talking to her, and she starts talking back. And so at that point that it is possessed her. It's just the degree from that point on exponentially gets worse and worse and worse with every single page turn. And so when, she starts exhibiting strange behavior, the mother takes her to her doctor, and the doctor sort of examines her, and they start noticing really strange situations that don't have any medical explanation. They take her and send her through tons of crazy tests, and nothing seems to come out and work right. I don't really want to walk through the story because everyone knows it so well. So I want to really land on some of these characters. So Regan in the novel, not the film, but in the novel, and it's not really different, but I want to divorce you the idea of Linda Blair. I want you to focus on the idea of Regan as a character, not the actress playing her. Regan is this 11-year-old girl who is inquisitive, incredibly smart, and it's suggested that once she gets possessed, she is actually going to the local church and like desecrating the church. And that's suggested because the clay that the bird is made out of, the detective William F. Kinderman comes around and sort of scrapes the bird a little bit while he's talking to Chris in order to get a little bit of something to test, and he sort of keeps it under his nail. He goes back to the station and then takes it out of his nail and has it tested. It matches the same residue that is on the defiled, like the defiling of the church was a lot of like phallic symbols being put on Christ, the crucifix statue, and just a bunch of sort of like black mass type stuff. And ultimately, because it never explicitly states, it just suggests that Regan is responsible for all this. And Regan's responsible for everything, really. Because, of course, the devil can't act outside of the body. It has to have, it can do like telekinesis and stuff, as is seen through the novel and the film. But when you're going to desecrate a church, you kind of need someone to go there to do it. It never really says when Regan can get out there to do it. And that's why this is the only part that's a little bit iffy for me, is that it suggests that she is the one that desecrated the churches over and over again throughout the course of the novel. And yet she is bedroom bound. So, it's just, it's sort of open-ended. That doesn't really sit well with me. That being said, Chris is a wonderful mom who you feel the love between her and her daughter. You feel the desperation as hers an adult and her utter lack of ability to do anything to help her daughter. And you just feel the despair oozing off of the page. And it is terrifying as a parent. I mean, to your point, you appreciate the movie more as a parent. The fear of something being wrong with a child that no one can figure out is terrifying. But it's the same thing with the novel, except you're able to get inside the character's head better in the novel than you can in the film. And you really do empathize with, or if not empathize, if not sympathize, then empathize with the situation. I don't know how many of your guys' kids are possessed, but it's really a situation of you wish you could help her. You wish you could do something because the desperation is palpable. Then, of course, Howard McNeil, the father, the absentee father, is just a shadow in the novel. He's not really even in the book at all. He does call, but he's a shadow in the novel. And they try to use him, doctors try to reference him as a sort of a guilt complex that Regan might have. Like she feels guilty that her parents were divorced, like she caused it. Because that's a common idea amongst children of divorces. It's not real, like parents don't get divorced for their kids, but they're kids and they don't know any better. So that's sort of how they process it. Then, Willie and Carl Ingstrom as characters, the caretakers of the home that Chris and Regan are staying in, are very, very interesting. And there's a whole dynamic story point, a sort of a B story that's brought up in the novel that was never explored in the book. So, Willie and Carl are husband and wife, and they had a daughter who Willie believes is dead. But the truth is that Carl has been going out to give money to his daughter because she was supposed to be dead, except she's a drug addict, and so that's why they thought she was dead. But in fact, she's still alive. But Carl doesn't want his wife to know that she's still alive because, again, she's a drug addict, and Carl is helping her. And so he becomes a point of interest for the detective Kinderman once Burke Dennings dies from, within the house, right outside the staircase, right outside the house. They find him with his head, sort of turned fully around. They find out that Burke Dennings was at the house. They find out that no one else was up there except for the daughter. So the daughter couldn't have possibly turned the guy's head around and thrown him out of the window. So it must have been someone large and strong. The only large and strong person is Carl, the caretaker. So he's prime suspect number one. And there's this whole side sort of B story of Detective Kinderman sort of tracking Carl. Carl's insisting he's going to films, finds out like through blatant lies that he hasn't actually gone to the film. Detective Kinderman thinks that he's having an affair, and so he sort of separates Carl from the family so that no one can overhear. He's like, look, off the record, if this is why you're gone, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to, you're not in trouble, but I need to know where you were because you're a suspect in this murder. So you have to tell me. And Carl, so ingrained in his head not to say anything about his daughter because of shame, because of embarrassment, which is horrible. First of all, if you have a child who is addicted to any substance, get them help. Don't give them money. Like if you love your children, then you will, like Chris in this novel, you will do anything you can to help them, not keep them in a perpetual state of pain and regression. As human beings, as certainly as adults who have children, but just as human beings in general, your job is to be the best version of you that you can possibly be. Who cares what other people do? Just be the best version of you. If you are incapable of doing that because of abuse or substance or mental disorder, then seek help. And if you're a parent, then it is your job. I don't care if they're adults or not. If there's children or adults, it is your job as the parent to look after them and like get them the help they need, or do everything in your power to do so. It doesn't mean if they're adults that you have to let them take over your life, but you have to be there. You have to be present. It bothers me that Carl is feeding into this disease. He thinks he's doing it from a position of love, but ultimately, he's part of the problem. He's enabling her addiction. And that is just, it's painful to see. It's this wonderful juxtaposition between the relationship of Chris and Regan that Carl has with his daughter. That's toxic. Chris and Regan is love. And it's so easy to come to this conclusion, to see it for what it really is in that juxtaposition between the two pairs. You know, isolated and alone, you might be able to empathize with Carl's decisions or whatever, but ultimately, you know, you had the kid. It's your responsibility to look after them. Full stop. Okay, so great dynamic, great B story plot. Then Burke Dennings. Burke Dennings is the director of the feature film that Chris is starring in. And he is a complete drunk, and he is convinced that Carl is a Nazi. And so every time he comes around Carl, he is talking shit to him, just denigrating him, trying to get him to admit that he is in fact a Nazi. Now, Carl is supposedly Swiss, and so he's not a Nazi. But that doesn't stop Burke Dennings, who is an alcoholic and an asshole. So, you know, you sort of get this sort of curmudgeonly appreciation for Burke Dennings, even though if he was my friend, I would probably smack him. I wouldn't allow a friend of mine. Again, it's none of my business, but if I've decided that you're a friend and you're decided that you're my friend, then it comes with the territory of looking after one another in some case. So if your friend is feeling really low, lend them an ear. If they're feeling really great, or they've accomplished something, then celebrate with them and let them know how excited and happy you are for them. That's what friendship's about, to be there when it's good and also to be there when it's bad. So if I had a friend acting up like Burke Dennings, I'd bitch slap him. I mean, you just don't act like that. You're showing your ass, and it's embarrassing. Chris apologizes for him. And I think, you know, she has him over for a dinner party, and he is just verbally assaulting Carl. And Chris is just like, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Burke. Oh, you're so funny. Stop. Okay, let's move along. And she tries her best to sort of placate him. No, step up. This is unacceptable behavior. Straighten up, or I'm going to bitch slap you. And if he keeps it up, bitch slap him. Just saying. Don't be my friend if you're going to act like an ass. All right, so I can't help but appreciate the character, not the personality of Burke Dennings, because ultimately he's using alcohol for a reason. You know, I mean, being a director for him is very, very stressful. I imagine it's stressful for everyone. People cope with it in different ways. He copes with it through alcohol, and it affects everything in his life. He's what do they call it? A high functioning alcoholic. This guy's like a medium functioning alcoholic. It's kind of weird. But you do kind of like laugh and have fun and enjoy his antics, even though you do kind of want to smack him around a little bit. He doesn't deserve to die, though. And so there's a point where Chris has to leave. Regan is clearly ill and going through the whole process of their trying to figure out what the hell it is. And Sharon has to go get some medication for Regan, the tutor who usually looks after her when Chris isn't around. And so Burke comes to the door looking for Chris. Sharon's like, I got to run. Chris isn't here. Can you watch Regan for me while I run to the drugstore real quick? I'll be right back. And Burke's like, sure, no problem. He goes and gets a drink. He hears screaming and like kerfuffling upstairs, goes to inspect. And of course, the demon that's possessing Regan is verbally assaulting Dennings, and then she physically attacks him, rips his head backwards, shoves him out of the window. He falls down, hits the ground, rolls down the stairs, which they call Hitchcock stairs, in real life as well. And it's just this really steep, long stairway right outside their window. Not really the case in real life. They had to add that extra thing on so that they could pay it off for the sake of the novel and the film, but ultimately that's how it's set up in the book. So, the doctors and stuff, they say it's a 1 in a million chance that his head could be ripped around backwards like that from the fall, but it is ripped around. He clearly did fall. 1 + 1 = 2. Occam's razor, right? So the whole involvement with the detective Kinderman is around the inspection or the detection of the murderer of Burke Dennings. Kinderman in the film is infinitely more palatable to me than Kinderman in the book. In the book, he is much more sort of abstract thinking out there. He does this sort of Columbo shtick where he's like, well, one more thing. Here's the deal. And he sort of goes on these weird rants and tirades, and then he comes back, and he's, I think the author, William Peter Blatty, is really influenced by Columbo, and it's annoying to me. If you're going to be a detective and you're going to come to someone's house, the most you can sort of walk around the subject of what you want is the way he's portrayed in the film. In the book, it just goes forever. And it's just like a full chapter of him talking to Damien Karras. And you're just like, I know this is supposed to be witty banter between two people and it's supposed to be entertaining and whatever, but it is annoying as shit. And I can't take it. So anytime I have to read about Kinderman, I'm a little bit bugged. Of course, the sequel novel to this is called Legion, and it's centered around Kinderman, so I'm a little concerned about that, but we'll get to it. The real mystery of Columbo is, where was his wife? Yeah, maybe it's like that old joke, take my wife, or, okay, I fucked the joke up, I can't remember. Anyway, where was I? Sharon Spencer, the tutor, she tries her best. What I like about the novel and with her character is that you see her getting frustrated with Chris. Chris is emotionally exhausted. She has passed her breaking point. And so she becomes verbally abusive to the people around her. Understandably so. She doesn't know what to do. Everyone's telling her to go somewhere else. She can't help her daughter, who she desperately loves, the only thing that she loves in this life. And her daughter is clearly in pain. And so she is literally past her wit's end. She doesn't know how to act. And, she has these moments of clarity where she realizes how poorly she said something or acted towards someone. And we get to see Sharon suffering through it. She is suffering not only being an assistant to Chris in helping her daughter Regan through this possession. And she, they don't know what it is and it's driving them crazy. But also being verbally abused by your employer and her desire to just walk away, because she has no connection. She could just say, you know what, fuck you, and leave. But she doesn't. She sticks it out. And that says a lot about her character, like her personal character, the character's character, but also her desire and her affection, her desire to help and her affection to Regan and Chris. And I really like seeing that. Captain Howdy is hollow. So we're presented as this idea that Captain Howdy is the devil. He's sort of a stand-in for the devil. And then we're presented with this idea that there's a whole bunch of different people embodying Regan, right? 3 or 4 or 5 different entities, because that's how it's presented to us. As soon as Father Marin gets in and watches her for circa 2.5 seconds, he's like, nope, there's only one personality. It's the devil. It's Pazuzu. We need to get him out right now. He doesn't think about it. He knows exactly what he's dealing with. And so Captain Howdy is presented as this sort of ghost, then demon, then the devil, then a devil, then one of many creatures inhabiting Regan, going all the way back, full circle back to just, nope, it's Pazuzu. That, I don't know that you needed to do that. I thought it was interesting because it really hyper-focused someone who believes in exorcism, which the only person here is actually Father Lancaster Marin, and every single other person in this novel who doesn't believe. He's the one that has a singular focus, understands that it's one person. Everyone else who doesn't believe in it sees it as a bunch of different personalities and stuff. Thought that was interesting. And then let's talk a little bit about Father Damien Karras. He's a Jesuit priest, which is the Jesuits of the Society of Jesus. He's a former boxer. You know, in his younger days, he's actually a psychiatrist. He was sent to psychiatry school after joining the Jesuits. He is a character who is not afraid to face the religion head on and refute it. He's not afraid to prove that it's not religious. It is, in fact, psychological, because that's his training. That's what he knows. And so when Chris comes up to him and says, how do I get an exorcism for my daughter? He's like, that's not going to happen. There's no exorcisms. No one does exorcisms. No one in the church believes in exorcisms. You know, I mean, he just goes through this whole tirade of how ridiculous it is. And then he realizes, oh shit, she's a woman in real pain, and I was just taunting her, like mocking her, and I didn't mean to do that. So, you know, he becomes a character that you really genuinely care about and appreciate. His dynamic with Kinderman's a little annoying, but the back and forth is supposed to be entertaining, so maybe someone else reading it would love it. I really like his character because I always think of him from the film. He's just a little bit tougher than your average sort of flamboyant priest, you know, this sort of wispy, thoughtful priest. Damien Karras is always thinking. He's always examining. He's always trying to get to the core of the problem. He's not willing just to say, you want an exorcism? Well, our church does them, so let's try it. He's doing everything he can, even when he fully believes that she is in fact possessed. He still can't find the proof in his head in order to convince someone else, like his in the hierarchy, his next up, who actually chooses whether or not they do it. He's constantly second guessing any evidence that he gets. And this is where it gets really sort of out there, because they present ideas, and I don't know if this is just because it's the 70s or because he's in the Jesuit priest in the church, but they do present these ideas that telekinesis is a real thing. And I do know that there are supernormal behaviors that people can exhibit. I've seen them firsthand. I know, you know, a lot of people say that that's magic or whatever. I think it's just a natural part of the human experience that we just don't fully understand. A lot of stuff like telepathy, ESP, telekinesis, you know, moving stuff with your mind and stuff. I mean, I'm not 100% in that camp, but I've seen some pretty weird stuff, and I've heard some really weird stuff, and I kind of think that maybe it could be real. But in the novel, it's 100% real. Like, he just says, no, the devil can move that wardrobe and have it crash over top of you. The devil can, you know, fly stuff through the air if they're possessing a body. He can't do it on his own, but if he's in someone's body, then he can do all this stuff. He can read your mind, and any answer he gives you is what your mind has already said, and so he just repeats back to you what you expect, sort of confirmation bias. And the whole time I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. Even me, as someone who kind of wants to believe in that stuff, who I'm not entirely sure does, I have a hard time with a priest who is so skeptical about exorcisms being like, oh yeah, but the devil is real and he can teleport things around and he can damage you. Well, which is it? You either believe in the devil as a real thing that can influence the physical world, thereby possessing someone, or you don't. You can't have it both ways. And yet throughout the entire novel, he does. He goes back and forth. He's like, no, there is no such thing as exorcism. There's no such thing as possession, but the devil can still do things in the real world. Where are you getting your rules, man? It doesn't make any sense. If he can't possess people, how can he move wardrobes? Or lift beds? Or possess people? You know, I don't know. Strange. So I do really like his character, even though some of his wishy-washy thought processes are a little... And ultimately, when you're talking about something like supernatural entities and, you know, devils and stuff like that, because it's all fictitious, you can't really have rules. It's all made up, right? So it's really not on the character. It's on William Blatty, the author, who should have in his head said, okay, if I'm going to write about exorcisms and I'm going to create a character who doesn't believe in them, I have to create logical rules of thinking that he must abide by. Otherwise, it blows the character up for the reader and it doesn't make much sense. He didn't do that. So it blew it up a little bit and it kind of bugged me. And that's why I appreciated Father Marin so much, because there was no questioning. It is 100%. He walked in to do the exorcism. He saw her and he walked right out. And he's like, let's do it. And Father Karras was like, whoa, don't you want to know the details? Don't you want to know about all the different spirits in her, and everything that she's done and said? He's like, no, I know that demon. I've fought it before and we're getting in. I mean, if he was like a street fighter or something, he just would have ripped his shirt off and dove right, in there, started punching her and stuff. There are some scenes that in the film they present, and they're pretty terrible in the film. In the novel, they're worse. They're worse. They're so much worse. There's the crucifix masturbation scene that is uncomfortable to watch in the film. But the way it's presented in the novel, it is horrible. Horrible. Because in the film, it looks like she's not enjoying it at all. She's just like, In the book, she's enjoying it. And it talks about it. And it's unfucking comfortable. When the mother is like runs to her and tries to get her to stop, and then she grabs the mother's head and throws it in her crotch. It's all bloody for obvious reasons. And she's like, eat me, bitch, eat me. Like in the film, you're like, ooh, that's a horrible scene. In the novel, it's just worse because it's just, you sat through this whole masturbation scene of just blood and crucifix and wood and her like moaning and stuff, and then her like getting her oh god damn, it was horrible. It was really tough to read. I mean, I think there is definitely a place for it because it shows you the extreme insanity of what's going on, and it really contextualizes the demon and the possessed, where it doesn't give a fuck. It just wants to destroy its host. And it's trying to cause utter despair to anyone witnessing it. So you have to be able to understand that the demons or the devil or whatever it is, all it wants to do is destroy. It's not there to live in the body and enjoy life in the body. It's there to mock creation, to mock God's will. And so it does these horrendous acts of blasphemy, but also just violation to the possessed. And so I'm glad that Blatty put it in there because it does really hit home the severity of this. But it's fucking hard to watch and read. I mean, it just really is. And that's just, you can't get around it. I don't know any human that is messed up enough to be like, yeah, I dig that. It's tough. It's just too tough. So I have a note here about Tom, but I can't remember who Tom was. There was a character named Ed Lucas that showed up to Father Damien Karras's room when he was trying to convince himself that Regan was possessed. And Ed Lucas ended up being a dream, a figment of his imagination. And yet, when Father Karras woke up, the specific type of cigarette that Father Karras didn't have any of, that Ed Lucas smoked in the dream and offered him, was actually in the ashtray. And that broke another rule. So you're telling me, as a reader, that the demon that's possessing Regan can travel to your dream and create a cigarette in your physical ashtray when you're awake. That makes zero sense. There has to be something. You tell me that the demon jumped to Father Karras and, he found a full pack of those cigarettes in his coat pocket. Then it makes sense that there's a burned out one in his ashtray. But if it's just a dream sequence, there should be no physical evidence of that. And that's what it presented. Again, very tough to sort of swallow. it's adding to the sort of craziness of this, like, okay, well, is it Regan and the devil that's sort of corrupting sort of blaspheming the church and putting the phallus on the Christ and stuff like that? Is it not? Is there really a devil that's able to do fantastical things? And Father Karras believes that he can read minds and move things through space, but he can't possess bodies, but then he can manifest cigarette butts. Like, I don't know the logic of this world. It doesn't make sense to me. I would like to know if there's an explanation, but maybe that's the point, is that we're thrown so many sort of red herrings and crazy ideas that we're supposed to stop analyzing. We're supposed to stop trying to figure it out and just accept, like Father Karras ultimately does, you can't rationalize the devil. It just is. And it will do. It doesn't need to make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. We're never going to understand it. It's the fucking devil. You know what I mean? So maybe that's what he was getting at. And if that's the case, awesome. In my head, I still need a reason. I like to contextualize this stuff too much. And you can't when it's this amorphous concept like the devil. So I thought that was weird. Father Dyer is this, piano playing sort of buddy friend with Chris and Father Karras, and he's like a really good friend with Father Karras, but he's a little annoying friend. He's like that friend that will come over when you're trying to study, and he just hangs out, and you're like, dude, I'm trying to focus here. He's like, I'm not stopping you, and then he's sitting there, doing his thing, like being annoying. That's Father Dyer. But there's a scene at the very end when Father Karras has drawn the demon out of Regan into himself, thrown himself out the window, rolled down the Hitchcock steps, and he's laying there broken and dying. And Father Dyer comes, this is going to make me cry. He came over to him, and you knew that they were friends throughout the course of the novel, but having that interaction on his deathbed when he's like, do you want me to, hear your confession? And he's just like, he pulls him up and he's holding him. I couldn't help but think of the power of that moment is not in a priest reading confession for another priest. It's in a best friend who doesn't understand what just happened. And really, arguably, doesn't even care. He's just holding his friend who is dying in his arms. And he's doing anything he can to make that as painless as possible. He can't help him. He can't save his life. The best he can do is hold him and know that he's not alone in death. Whew. Damn. And that's comforting. It's beautiful. I was weeping openly when I finished this damn book. Like, it just, for whatever reason, it really, really hit me hard. Not his death, but the way the dynamic between Father Dyer and Father Karras really, really hit me hard, obviously. So then when you're reading this, the section 3, the abyss, that's the pure hellish possession space where Father Karras is trying to convince himself and trying to get evidence of the possession. And then the part 4, and let me cry come unto thee, is the part where Father Merrin comes back into the novel after being absent from, the entire novel except for the very beginning. And he comes in and faces the Pazuzu. He knows this is the end for him. He's been taking heart medication the entire film. The entire novel. He is near the end of his life. And he's willing to step up to this demon knowing that he may not step away from it. But this is what he does. This is his life's work. And he's sworn to it. And so he goes and he ends up dying. He sent Father Karras away and faced Pazuzu on his own, thinking that maybe he could deal with it. And he's trying to protect Father Karras because the demon the whole time has been playing with Karras's mind. Another B story plot is Father Karras feeling like he abandoned his mother and his mother was sort of all alone, and she went to a hospital. Her uncle put her in a hospital. His uncle put her in a hospital, her brother, and he couldn't afford it because he's a priest. He doesn't have any money. He couldn't afford to take her out of the mental institution that she was put in and, take care of her himself. But ultimately, he went against everything and he pulled her out and he put her back into her own apartment. But he doesn't have the time to be around her and check in on her all the time. So she was dead for days in her apartment before people found her. And that weighed on him as a son, as a man, to have abandoned his mother and not be, I mean, this book is filled with emotional connective tissue that if you're not human, it might not affect you at all. But if you're a feeling human being, it's going to hit you with a 1-2 punch over and over again, from Chris and Regan to Father Karras and his mother to Carl and his daughter and Father Dyer and Father Karras. I mean, this is just, even Kinderman, who I didn't like very much, and Father Karras, and then later Father Dyer. This celebrates the human condition so beautifully, and the connection between human beings and the connections that are so incredibly important that we need as human beings. We cannot be isolated. I can't have stuff flying in my face. We can't have stuff. We can't be isolated and alone, sitting on a mountain as a hermit in a cave. That's not what our species is. That's not how we evolved. We evolved together with our tribes. Now, whether that tribe is your immediate nuclear family or the chosen family or your friends or a neighborhood tribe, or, whether you identify as your tribe as a nationalistic sense, you need that connection as a human being because it's what we are. Full stop. And this book really, really celebrates that concept throughout the entirety of it. I really just loved it so much. You have to give this novel 5 stars, or in this particular case, 5 evil eyes. It's beautiful in every sense of the word. It's horrifying, and it's frightful. It brings horror into the real world, into real situations, and it forces you to question, what would I do if it was my kid? What would I do if I was helping a friend and it was their kid? How would I react differently? And would I be able to do anything of assistance? It leaves you feeling hopeless and helpless in some parts. Ultimately, in the end, Father Karras, of course, does, drag the demon out of Regan, literally by just tormenting it, saying, look, get me. You want something great? Come get a priest. Come into me. Leave this poor girl alone. She's done nothing. You wanted to kill priests. You killed Father Marion. Come kill me. Get into me. And it takes him over, immediately. And then he just immediately gets this moment of clarity. He's like, okay, I'm possessed. I got to get it out. I got to kill it. And at the end of the film, there's a sense that they lost to the devil because it killed Father Marin, it killed Father Karras, almost like the devil got away. In the book, that tender moment that brought me to tears between Dyer and Karras, when he's holding him, Father Karras had a smile of victory on his face. He defeated the devil when he killed himself, and he knew it before he finally succumbed to death. And Father Dyer saw it in his eyes. And so it ends with a position of hopefulness, whereas the film can be seen as a little hopeless at the end. Now, I have the remastered version of the film, which has a sort of, added scenes, but also an added ending that gives a little more levity than the original theatrical cut did. So you don't feel so despaired when you finish it. But this novel, it didn't feel bad when you finished it. You felt elevated, you felt lifted, you felt lighter and happy. The final scene in the novel, of course, is Chris and Regan moving out, and Regan can't really remember everything that happened to her, but there's this beautiful moment where Father Dyer comes up and it's to say goodbye, and Regan looks up at him. Oh, fuck, this is gonna get me too. And just gives him a kiss, he is the stand-in for Father Karras, who saved her life. And she doesn't see him anymore as a person as much as she sees the collar, and she knows for her that collar means savior in the literal sense of the word. And I thought that was just this incredibly tender moment as well. Like the end of this book is just, it's brutal. It will tear you up, man. I don't know, maybe I'm a big pussy and it won't affect anyone else, but it really did affect me. And then he leaves. The detective, Kinderman, is like trying to rush up to see her, Chris, before she leaves. He's too late, so he connects up with Father Dyer. And the whole film, he's trying to get people to go to the movies with him. He loves the movies, which is, that's a fun little story. But he approaches Dyers and stuff, and they have that great little Casablanca line where it's, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And a sort of closing scene. What William Blatty did with this novel is not just create a horror, arguably the best horror novel ever written. Amityville is a close second. But he created characters that have more depth to them than any other novel's characters I've ever read. And I mean that. I read a lot. Like, these characters are full of desires and passions and flaws. They're full of humanity. What makes us the best version of us and the worst version of us? And each one is distinct. And the way they interact is interesting and engaging. Not always in a good way, but still, it's so deep that I'm afraid people will read it and be struck by the horror of it. They certainly watch the film and they come away struck by the horror of it. But this is so much more than just a horror novel. It's a novel about humanity. And if you go into it expecting that, looking for it, you're going to find a well of just hope and passion. Yes, it's surrounded at times with despair and fear. But you can't have the light without darkness. And I really appreciated that. You know, it would be so easy to just do like an Amityville horror, like these are sort of one-dimensional characters go into a house, they're tormented, and they leave. This is more than that. This is a book that really cared to explore the minds of its characters and develop them out for an audience that would want to see that. It's grown up. It's engaging, and I highly recommend it. So definitely, if you have not read it yet, do yourself a favor and get your ass out to the library. I literally just searched it up on my phone, and within a second, I was reading it from the library, digitally on my phone. There's no reason you don't read this book. You will be happy you have done it. That's all I have to say. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this review of The Exorcist, a novel by William Blatty. Let me know what you thought of the novel. Did you read it? Did it affect you emotionally like it affected me? Am I just reading too much into it? Did the inconsistencies with the devil and Father Karras bother you as much as it bothered me? I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. And of course, I'll get to the film another time. So if you've seen the film, I look forward to chatting with you about that as well. Have a fantastic week. And always remember that evil spelled backwards is live. So get your asses out there and be evil. Maybe not Pazuzu evil, but close.